Make sure the stream is up. Boom, stream is up. Alright, we're gonna get started in just a moment. Alright, so, first of all, let's do Fist of 5. How are we feeling on Node so far? The command line stuff, constructors, yeah, okay. That's good. Let's see if I can blow this up a little bit. Alright, so today's class is going to be a little different because it's supposed to be a Saturday class. It's pretty jam-packed, so I'm cutting a couple of things, but that doesn't mean we're not going to have a lot to do. The first half of the class is basically one big activity that we'll split into several little chunks, like we've been doing apparently. We'll be done with that around like 8:30ish, so it's going to be a later break. We'll take a quick break, we'll come back and finish the last bits of the class. So we'll have about, we'll need about at least 30 minutes after the break or so, I think, to finish everything. Let me double check, because if that's the case, yeah, we're gonna need about 40 minutes after. Okay, so yeah, about 8:45 we'll come back and we'll do the last part of class. So anyway, what are we doing then, since we've got one gigantic activity? Basically, I slacked out earlier this TV API, TV Maze API, that allows you to search shows and actors, actresses, whoever, and see some information about them, right? So we're going to be working with an API to be able to take information from the CLI and query against it. Obviously, you're going to have to use some constructors in this because you're going to want to build an object that can handle these queries for you. So what does it look like? What does the final product look like? There's going to be two files that you'll get. They're going to be empty, of course, but you'll get the files. It's going to look like this, right? CLI.js and TV.js, and then your normal package JSON, node modules, and all that fun stuff. So what you're going to be able to do is run node CLI.js, and what's going to do is if you don't give the proper parameters, it's going to start searching for a show. So in this case, it just searches for Andy Griffith's show, gives you some information about it, and we're all good. You'll be able to search for a specific show, like Westworld, for instance, and it'll tell you information about Westworld. You can also search for an actor, and it'll give you a little bit of information about the actor. That's all it's going to do. Those three functions, right? One, no input parameters. What are we going to do? Searching for a specific show, searching for a specific actor. There's information about each one that you got to display. So, with the show, you're going to have to display its rating, network, genre, some summary information. For the actor, obviously the name, birthday, gender, country, and then a URL about them that you can pull from the TV Maze API. It'll give you all of this stuff. That's a gist of what you're going to be working on. Any questions on that? I know it's not giving you a whole lot. Oh, there's one other thing that it does. I'll show you. As I've been running these commands, this log.txt file has appeared. And if I look at it, it logs everything I did. So this is the last part. As I'm running these commands, they need to be logged to this log file in a nice readable format. So you can go back and take a look at them, right? That's effectively what we're going to be doing for a while. So first thing I want you to do, this is going to be technically activity 11, I think. Yeah, I want you to spend a couple of minutes, only like 5 minutes, working with your group. Come up with a group, you know, the usual groups to work with, and kind of try to sketch out the architecture of what this app is going to look like, right? So you're going to have a CLI bit. You're going to have to be able to search for shows, search for actors, log out to a text file. Just kind of decide either what the objects in the code would look like or what the files would look like or a little bit of both, and give yourself an idea of how you want to tackle this from an architectural standpoint. It's not necessarily pseudocode, as we've seen it before, but it's just kind of an overall design plan. Like, okay, well, we imagine it's going to look something like this, right? And those plans may change, and that's okay, but just give it like 5 minutes of thought. We'll start out there. I'll slack out the official instructions, but we don't really have time to do the whole activity. And then we'll move on. Yes, start activity 11. Okay, so there wasn't a lot of time, I know, but like I said, this is one of the activities I have to kind of cut today. So an example of what this architecture might look like if you had a lot of time to draw it out and think about it, might be something like this, right? I can blow it up a little bit. So right here, what we have is the CLI, and in the CLI, people are going to be entering text. You're going to get some sort of user input, right? It's going to take that user input, it's going to parse it, it's going to send it to the TV module. And this TV module or object or whatever you decide it is most likely going to have a decision to make. Is it going to try to find a show or find an actor? And based off of whatever one it does, it's going to aggregate some data, and then at the end, it's going to log the text to a text file, right? And then we can just print what we found to the console. So this is kind of like a flow diagram of how the information moves through the application. Is this the only way you could draw an architecture? No, absolutely not. You could do class diagrams like a UML or something, which we don't really cover in this class, or a sequence diagram, which is very similar in some ways. So there are lots of ways that you could do this, but this is just an example. So trying to think about the flow of information through your application is extraordinarily helpful when thinking about how you might want to modularize it, right? Because sometimes the information can flow and you're like, well, it can flow to this component and it can flow to this component from 50 different places, right? So we need to figure out how best to express that in its own API. Any questions on architecture or best practices of architecture or anything before we move on? Pretty much just going to jump right into it. Cool. All right, so now we're going to do activity number 12, and we're actually going to start working on the CLI. So now you're going to start building that functionality, node, CLI, show, and then you're going to have any number of words delimited by spaces after your search term, right? So show is the search term, or the command term. Actor is the command term. The rest is the search term. And this has some rules, too, about what you should do. Start with the CLI. You can add some if statements to print to the console, whether it's actor or show or whatever, right? So start working on this with your group. The instructions should be in your GitLab repo, and we'll talk about this in about 15 minutes or so. That's fine. You just got a leg up on the competition, huh?
I just want to bump into that thing. I'm just thinking this now. I try to do this a lot. That's how you get in. It is car. I'm walking it home.
They're gonna do that and get the payment for them. No phones or people for an hour for those. Yeah. I don't know what walking, but I was like, who's part of that?
Good thing it's long.
It's like an hour and a half. Yeah. Well, you start with the CLI, parsing it, and then you have to call the API, and then you have to write the text files. So they kind of chunk it up like that.
Okay. I just want to make sure this is good.
Yeah.
Something.
Nope.
5 minutes later, we're switching.
No, I'm just, this one's actually split up, so, like, at every phase, I'll be going over it.
That works.
So,
Okay. I'll look through it.
Sort of. Not fully, but where you at, you know? Yeah, I didn't really get too much done today. Those are the best codes, I don't know how it works.
You're not gonna specify that yet. You just need to print a physical for an actual physical stuff. The next part, they'll tell you that. Bypassing the entire class, Alana, do you even need us anymore? If you're done, then I mean, you can go ahead and jump to the next activity. You want to get started. Even if early, by all means.
Way to take 15 off and
I didn't know where
make
we're
us
supposed to
all that.
stop. All I asked is what information is different.
Super good.
Just like the local one.
Progress?
Essentially,
All
like,
those
in
go
like
off.
simple terms, it's just like switching it to an actor instead of playing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
How you doing? Everything up on the documentation.
Don't worry about that stuff too much. You just want to press the command line right now. So right now we should focus on getting stuff from the command line, right? So you're going to get a search command. So either shell or actor. And we're going to get search terms. You have to join those all together so you can search for the same job. That's what we want to do first. Sound good?
So, should we do an extended extension for like what part of it? And like after
Yeah, actor or
the
shell.
show.
There can be an escape there. Definitely.
I feel like the most of them is one if someone's very
Yeah, most definitely.
that and forward.
Yep.
Okay, how
Good?
good into your
Yeah, so it's like,
Good. You guys doing good working together? By all means, you can work as a team on this one. There's no reason to work alone. Especially because each step is progressively more difficult.
there's a minimum about it. But my wife is reassured,
Yeah, Alex, if you want to work with them, or you can sit on the other side of Peyton with you, so you guys can both.
So
I was thinking having like Mars search.
So I'm trying to like set up the switching time.
We got 5 more minutes on this one. We'll go over it. What's up next, phase?
Which is seems search.
What? Typing it all? Over and over and over again? I'm really good.
I just forgot the term. It's gonna be like Y or URL or something. Does it require or
All right. Let's go over this section. So what do we need to do? We need to take the command line. We need to find our command, and then we need to get our search terms, decide which command we're running, the show or the actor, and then print out the command and the search terms to the console. Just for now, just so we can get our CLI ready to go, right? So first thing we're going to need is our search command, right? So I'll call it search. And it's going to start at process argv2. Why? Because... Yep. Yes. Okay. No need for the sarcasm. I get it. We all know it by now. The repetition is key, my man. So, all right. So we've got we've got the search term now. Theoretically, we've got the search term. We don't know that for sure, but if the user's not, you know, jacking around with our application and they did it right, then great. We're good. Next we need is the term we're going to search with, right? So they said specifically in the instructions to use the variable term. You could call it whatever you want. I don't think there's going to be variable police, but it's possible. So again, we're going to need process argv, and we're going to need everything after argument 2, right? The third argument. And there's an easy way to do that, and that's with that slice. Because this is an array, we can tell slice the number we want to start at, the index we want to start at, which in this case is 3, and basically we're going to get everything after argument, at index 3 and after, in a new array. Ooh, that was a good one. And then we can go ahead and join them by space. So join is another one you can use to basically say everything in this array, just put them together, and whatever I specify in that join function is what we're going to join them with. In this case, a space. So it's going to be index 3 space, index 4 space, index 5, so on and so forth, until we'll get one word basically. So if our search parameter is empty, so let's just say the user is jacking around and they're doing bad things with their app and they don't know what's going on. So if they gave us nothing, what can we do? Well, we should just default it to show. Since show and actor are two commands. After that, if we don't have a term, we're going to default it to the Andy Griffith show, or Andy Griffith. Now, what's the next thing we need to do? We need to determine if we're using the show command or the actor command, and then console log that out, right? There's a few ways you can do it. You can either do it with an if statement, set of if statements, or a switch. Now, depending on how you do it, there's some rules here. So, one of the things that the example solution leaves out is checking if the command that they've entered is show or actor. If it's not show or actor, we have a few options. One, we could ignore it and just fail, right? The thing will try to search and be like, I don't know what the hell you're asking me to do. Or we could default it to 1, or we could say this is not a legitimate command. I kind of like the third one the best. It's the most user-friendly because it tells the user you did something wrong, and ideally we'd have a console log that says, oh, you can only use show and actor, right? We don't have time to do that right now, but it's something if you get done early you can implement, and I recommend you do it. So in that case, since we want to match on specific items, we're going to use a switch. Switch makes more sense here, in my opinion. And then we always want to normalize our switch statement so it's easier for us to write case because the switch statement's exact, right? It uses that triple equals. So if we have a search term show and it's in all caps and we're having a case that says, well, we want the case to literally be show, it will fail, right? If that search variable happens to be all caps or even has 1 cap or something like that, right? It'll just fail because they're not the same. Console.log, and let's just say searching for a TV show. What's the other case? Actor, right? Same thing. Searching for a TV actor. Now my capitalization is off, and I'm pretty anal, so I gotta fix that. Alright. The next one, we do default, right? Because default says, default's like, well, if nothing matched, then I guess we do this. And in this case, our simple solution would be, you can only use show or actor, which isn't a very good message, but it's a message. And then the last thing, let's log out our search term. Let's actually use the string interpolation that we played with last time. So remember, you use the backticks, $, curly braces, and then you're going to put your variable that you want to inject in there. Put a space because we want to have a literal space between the two. And then put our term, right? We can even make this better. Searching for, and then even better, I could wrap my term maybe in single quotes here so it looks super nice. Cool. So this should theoretically work. Why don't we check? I'll slack this code out and I'll show you guys again, so don't worry. Node, and then it's going to be CLI. Let's do show, test show. Searching for a TV show. Searching show for test show. That looks pretty nice. Let's check our actor. Actor, test actor. Searching for a TV actor, you can only use show or actor. Interesting. Do I not have a break? Oh. Well, there you go. We just learned a valuable thing about a switch statement. If you don't have a break, it falls through to the next statement regardless. And the next statement happens to be default, which always matches, which means it's going to print both. So there, look, we found a bug. So if I run it again, I'll only get the 2. Now let's run something that's not a command. Dumb. You can only use show or actor. Searching dumb for test dumb. Right? Cool. Alright. Again, here's my code. This is a good example of how you could use the CLI. I'll slack this out. Any questions on this code? Cool. Alright, let me slack it out. That's an example of how you could start. Stephanie, if you could slack out the actual solution. Stephanie will slack out the actual solution to this one as well. Actually, I can do that. Don't worry about it. Here's the real solution. that was number 12. All right, so now we're going to. Does anyone have any questions on this? Anything I did in there intriguing to you? You're not quite sure how it works yet. Wants a refresher? That's totally cool. All right. Well, we're gonna move on to activity 13 then.
Are those curly braces around search and turn?
Yes, they are.
Can you move that chair out of the way too?
Nope, that needs to be there.
Thank you.
All right. Is that a little bit easier seeing that it's up more? There, I'll also move it up. I also slacked that code out so you can take a look at it. Anyway, we're going to move on to activity number 13, which is implement the show functionality, the show search. And so in this one, you have to basically implement searching for a TV show, logging into the text file, and showing all everything that you got back on the command line, right? So there's some instructions there. You're going to spend about 30 minutes doing this one. And then we'll briefly go over it. Remember, you need that TV Maze API. And it's in there, but I'll slack it out again.
I don't know what it's called, but it's called, and whatever it does, it makes it so you can put like super possible on the function or whatever. Your keyboard even have that thing?
So I'm not gonna start. Because I'm looking for my VR now.
Started. So we got the CLI done for us now.
So it's just
Yeah. So TV, yep, TV has a constructor in it. Okay. So we need to install the request package. That's the first thing we need to do. So install the request package. Make sure you're not there too. It's right there. You want me to Oh. We're going to go to 13 install. Installed. And then install request package by running into install request to your terminal. You want to install one?
yeah. I was just making sure I put my 15.
Right here.
And then uninstall. Because I do it from 15.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep going to 15.
Cool. So now we got that installed, but we need to go inside the TV's constructor function and create a file show method. So, how do we do that, Alex? So here's the skeleton. And then here's an example there. So what do we need to do? We need to use the request package to hit the TV's main API for the URL.
Did we just lose that too? Earlier?
So not familiar with that, but yeah, we used it in the classes. Go to TVJS. First thing we need to do is import the request package. You have an import. They're going to be required to You know how to do it? You know how to do it. You can show out.
You need to cry with
No, you need to require the package. You do not need to require.
How can you self-required?
No, you don't make it self-required.
You sound like required.
Requires baked in. It's exactly like that, except for you need the package request and not the TV. So you can copy that and then just slightly change it. It's fine. Yep, you always go first. So require, the parameter takes in the name of the package you want. The name of the module, right? So what's the name of the module? It's request, right?
So
It's called request. We just installed it. Then it can install request. That's the one you want. Nope. You want require there. And then you need to change the parameter to be request. The parameter of require.
Just do it.
Yep. It says tv.js right now. Or tv right now. What does it need to be? That needs to be request.
Just like that.
Yep. Why is it just like that? And why is it not dot slash or anything? It's already installed in the node modules, right? If you use
You just have to
dot,
kind of activate it.
the dot you're looking for specific folder.
yes, if you use the dot slash, you're looking for a file specifically. When you're not looking for a file, because you already have the request installed. So, one thing I've changed is that you're assigning request right now to a variable called TV. Do you want to do that? What should we probably call that variable?
Plus two, yeah.
No? Do you need TV? Yeah. Choose request. That var TV equals require request. I'm telling you that variable name TV, you don't want to have it there. You want to name something else. You gave me a good suggestion, which was request.
It's not changes too.
Nope, that doesn't change because that is the variable TV.
So these two basically have to be the same.
They don't have to be, but it's a good idea.
Just to keep consistency.
Yep. They don't have to be, but that is a good intuition. They probably should be most of the time. Right? So, now we need to use request. You guys remember how to use request? Remember to use request baby?
And it's not anything like those something or meeting.
Yeah, that's fine if you need to copy the other
Which one is that one?
It's in the and node.js.
So what I would recommend moving forward, hopping from the oldest sentence is fine because it's an example it works. Figure out how to Google it and figure it out with Google because in the real world you won't be able to copy it on the front because they won't exist, right? So we need to get better at figuring out how to find these packages on NPM and figure out how they work with reading documentation. So if you with Google request.js, okay, GitHub request, the first one right there. So look at that first example. What does it do? It requires it, and then it does what?
To request a form. And then after that, the forms are not supposed to
Okay, don't worry about that right now. Write it with the URL, with our URL, showing you what it is. Where's the code need to go? What explicitly we're trying to do?
try to find this one.
Trying to find show, right?
So we should put it into this.
Yep. We're going to find show function, right?
Yeah, this is where the API would go. This is where requesting a work from.
Yeah. So let's go under RU or RU.
Info URL.
You can put your little.
It's already fine.
Yep.
Because you already have this one.
Yeah, I'll search for URL.
We need to put the very bottom. Nice. Cool. So the next part is that function, that crazy function. We need that callback function. That's just what we need. This is asynchronous.
So console login and console status.
No, you don't need the function ones. You need that function.
Just this.
Oh,
Yeah,
function
you need that
response.
function.
There's no fix it.
Make sure you close everything. You're going to do closing curly brace here, closing parentheses, right? Make sure your syntax is good before you do anything else.
Parentheses the close on, right?
It has its own parentheses. Where does the closing parentheses go? No, don't do that. Don't do that. It's going to make it harder.
Okay.
Look at the code. So we have request, we have an opening parenthesis, right? We have function, we have an opening parenthesis. Then you see closing parenthesis. Okay? But then you see the open curly brace. What needs to come after an open curly brace?
Over whatever we want.
A closing curly brace. Right? Then, what do you need after that closing curly brace? Remember, we have request, an opening parenthesis, then a function, the opening parenthesis, then the closing parenthesis, then the opening curly brace, now a closing curly brace, then there's a closing parenthesis. So yes, now your syntax is good, so now we can worry about what needs to go inside that function. Remember, everything comes in pairs, and you're going to spend a lot of time worrying and defining that pair if you don't do it the right way. So the first thing you do. Okay, so inside this request, now we have that request. What do we need to do? Let's see. Inside TV,
We'll get to
get to
show.
be wrong. Once you have the response body of the AJAX request, use JSON parse to convert it to JSON. So once you have the body, use JSON parse to convert it to object. Look at your code. Once you have the body, use JSON parse to convert it to JSON object.
From the looks of them, yeah.
Why do you guys need to use the curly braces? What does JSON parse do?
I kind of like breaks it up from like an API request to a game.
It's not like this. It takes in a string and it turns it into an object. So we need to find the string that represents that object so that we can turn it into an object. Right, so let's look at that code. Var object, no, back in the website, pretty wrong. So see how it says var object, right? So we know that we're going to have an object variable, right? It's created from JSON parse. It's equals JSON.parse. That's the function we're going to call. Inside that function, it has one parameter. And that parameter is what? Yep, and that one is highlighted. What is that parameter? Parameter's name? Parameter's a string.
Oh, the whole string.
Yeah, because it's in quotes, right? That's a string. That's just a string. That's all it is. Don't read too much. So what that tells us is, if we call JSON parse on a string, we might get an object back.
And that object is this string.
Yeah, that string will represent an object. So what is our string? We want to do var object equals JSON.parse. We know that. You can copy that line. We just need to find out what our string is. Well, that's good. Could be. Yep, there. That's exactly right. So read what that says. Once you have the response body, okay, so that line 13, once you have the response body of the AJAX request, JSON parse, you convert it to a JSON. So look at the code. What do we need to put there instead of that random string?
Genre, average rating, network name, sound.
No, this is the response body, right? Yes. Response body. What is the response body? Yeah, you can delete that whole string. You know? You don't need any of it. Well, you need that. So you need the function in parentheses. You need parentheses. Get rid of the string. Get rid of everything in the quotes. And the quotes themselves. Alright. So you just go in there. Just put body? Yeah, exactly. You just put body. You have the body there already, right? That's the response body. Now you have your show. Okay. After getting the JSON response from the AJAX request, there's a string containing the following information from the return show. So, here's the question. Do we know what this object looks like? It's coming back to the API. No, you don't. So what should we do first? We can test this. What should we do first? Console log that body? Console log the object, yes. Console log the object. Let's run this code and see what that looks like so we can figure out how to do the next step. Are you following along? You got this code?
I'm following. Okay. I paste this part of it. Wait for the URL.
Did you finish this part, Peyton?
No, I'm stuck at somewhere.
It's kind of stuck at the part we're doing.
Well, I forgot when it says it shows that object or whatever, how to get the normal level. So the JSON parse
You can't console log the object.
oh yeah.
You have to take the properties of the object and turn them into a string. Alright, let's look at your CLI.js. You're on the right track. Let's look at your CLI.js and see what it's doing. Okay? Alright, let's go ahead. So just try to do node CLI and see what happens. Okay, so we got some back. Boom, that's what we got back. That's a monster. No, it's not pretty. So, but what do we need now? We need the name of the show, the genres, shows
from here.
the network name,
Yeah,
and the show
I
summary.
copied that.
Those are things you want to look for that object. You need to figure out what they're called. So, what are their properties?
So,
You get it?
Yeah, I don't know why I was stuck on that homework too, but I don't know why I forgot that, but.
It's easy to forget.
so just show.
So you need the name, the genres, the rating, the network name, and the summary. You need to find what those properties are called. So there's one called name, one called genres, and one called summary. Network name and the end of the rating. Let's see, is there a rating or something? So there's a network, and then that's got a name. Yep, you're going to want network name and then there's rating.
What is that called again? Where we work on it? I totally forgot what it's called. Like the name of it.
What, where it's another object? Nested object?
I think so. Where we had like, for example, if I want to go to like New York network, all the way down to like country, and then all the way down to time zone.
Yeah, that'd be like nested object where it uses the dot, right? Network dot name, network dot country dot time zone.
I remember that.
Okay, so we know everything we need. Okay, so let's get them out and put in variables. In the QGIS. So first thing we want is the name. We want the name out of that object, right? So set it into a variable. Create a new variable. Name, nice. What do you gotta get it from? Remember, we gotta pull it from the object, right? Get the name from the object. You just told me. You literally just told me. that thing, right? What about OBJ dot main?
Oh, yeah, I saw
Yeah, you can put a semicolon.
Wait, don't I put parentheses?
Give me the parentheses here. OBJ dot name.
But it just breaks when I try to hold it.
And a semicolon. That's it. You pulled the name off the object. So now pull the genre.
Console on the object from the back. Just like this.
Exactly. So then, don't put a semicolon. Now get your network name.
Back here.
Nice. Now get the average rating.
And that's where it's breaking. I console. Oh, just breaking.
Nope. It's a nested object. Rating dot data. Nope. Look at the data.
So is it possible that some things just don't have ratings or you have no solution? I'm saying rating might put that
Rating dot average.
body
Right?
is so qualified.
Yeah, we can rating there.
Oh, I totally forgot about that.
So it's a mess to read.
And what's the last one you need? Summary. Summary from
Genres.
Starting to be a little bit more.
Sorry, make more sense?
Yeah, definitely more sense.
It's good. These are your own.
More in simple terms for me.
Good, man. Now what you need to do is take all those, all 5 of those. You need to console log them. Console log them first. Stephanie, do you remember what time we started the 6 evening? Does anyone remember?
We only had an hour of class.
What?
7:30, so we had an hour of class.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you sent out the last assignment at 7:04.
Okay, so keep going through those instructions. Try to finish. Yeah, console log, and then no, put all these in a string. We've already console logged the object. Put all those in a string. Add them all together as a string. Console log that.
Oh, okay. So we did
Yeah, like show part of it or whatever. Or just like, this is the whole console log right there. I don't know why not. Anybody else's rating break?
It just says null.
What? Like the time? Was that show name counter and stuff? That just shows up in the console log.
If he does body,
Yeah, it's like
not
show
rating,
name.
to get to it, it's coming
Yeah,
back on
just
the
shows
body.
up.
So how should we reference it down into the actual body of the response?
Let me see.
To be honestly,
There's is working.
the rating should come back.
So rating does average.
My rating is because, you know how you have to like JSON parse it or whatever?
I'm not sure why.
You have to JSON parse it, otherwise you can't pull the stuff back out of it. Yeah, oh, you're doing it with object, I just think my notes.
Like this? Oh, well, yeah, I think when that goes under one, basically parts of the body which are not supposed to
Because you put those in quotes, it's gonna cause a long string.
You're trying to.
Oh, one string, so you gotta break it up.
So is that what you use the dollar
Something,
sign?
Yeah, that dollar sign makes it so you can toss a lot of Well, you gotta put
It's the little things like that that'll kill you every time.
every time I'm just like, oh yeah, I can just parse the body and that's why I'm just parse the body, but it's pretty sure. Knocked it out for this. Curly brackets for those ones. And names on our average. When you do it that way with the freaking money sign and stuff, you don't even need comments. Yeah.
That's it?
Oh, you need dollar sign for each one.
I'll give you a couple more minutes and then we're gonna go over this one too.
What is somebody come back with?
Because it's HTML. You could send it up to a web page and display it just like the HTML.
What about them? What about that picture?
Oh, the break here. Well, that's not inside this project. Nothing left. Storage dirt. And then after that, you can just kind of start typing in what your own description of the video will be.
And then there's a picture of Garrett going, through the day.
All right, let's go over this one. Go over it real quick. This was tough. Vista 5, how are we feeling on this activity right now? Said right now, how are you feeling? Feeling okay? Mostly feeling okay? That's good. All right. So, let's go through the instructions one by one. We have this TV object. Now, you'll notice that this var TV equals function, it doesn't look like the other constructors we've done. We've only seen it where we've done like function, TV, right? And then we know it's a constructor, but this still counts as a constructor. We're just assigning it differently, right? We're assigning the TV variable a function as opposed to creating a named function called TV. But they're effectively the same thing. Anyway, we have a TV constructor we're going to turn into a cool object. The first thing we need to do is install request. Once that's done, cool. Now what do we need to do? Well, we're going to need to use request to request from that Maze API the show we're searching for. So we need to import request. Remember, we use require, and because request is a package that's installed and not a file, a local file, we don't have to use // or anything weird like that. So now we have request. How does request work? Well, it's a function, right? It takes in a URI string, and then it has potentially some optional options, or it just takes a callback, which we're actually going to learn more about callbacks today after the break, so it's going to be fun. Callbacks are interesting. So we know what our URL is already. It's given to us, right? And then we need that crazy function. And if you didn't remember how it worked, so say you looked at the docs or whatever because you didn't remember all the parameters, it's error, response, and body. Any questions so far? Cool. Alright, so in here there's a few things we need to do. One, if error, we can return console.log error. We'll just say some bad things happened. We'll just assume that's a worst case scenario. Now remember that response has a couple of things on it that we can use to determine if the response was okay, and one of them is the status code, right? I can't remember if it's status or status code. Does anyone remember? Status code with capital C, right? So if response.status code does not equal 200. Now, 200 is A-OK, right? We're going to get used to this pretty soon. If it's not A-OK, then we are done. Now, here's one thing you need to pay attention to, though. When you're using an API, if we're doing a check like this, they won't always return 200 to be okay. They could return 201, 204, and a couple other 200 codes that also mean it's okay. However, 200 okay is the most common because it also usually means that there's content with it. So 200 okay, there's content. 204 means it was good, but I'm not giving you anything back. So in that case, it's not really that important. So let's just say if it's not okay, we can just console.log we could not find, and then we'll just do the traditional concatenation here. We could not find show, and we'll just return. So, okay, we couldn't find the show. Now we took care of our error handling. We make this nice and robust so our users know if something bad happened or for some reason we couldn't find the show. Right? So the next thing, we need to take the body and we need to convert it into an object. Var show. Let's call it found. Well, this one's a hard one because we have a show variable, so what do you name it? I'll just call it show object, which isn't a good name. And then we take the body and we go ahead and we parse that. So now we have this object, cool. After getting the JSON response, create a string containing the following information: the name of the show's genres, the show's average rating, the network name, and the summary. Okay, so let's create a string. This is where string interpolation is really nice. Show description, we'll call it. And we'll just go ahead and open up with those backticks of a full-bodied string. So it's going to look a little weird. But you can do it in all kinds of crazy formats. We'll do showObj.name. On this one, what is it going to be? Genres? Genres. We can do showObj and then genres and then .join, because this comes in as an array, which you'd see if you console log this object. Let's do average rating. So this one is going to be showObj.rating.average. This one is going to be the network name. ShowObj.network.name. And this one's going to be the summary. Which, why don't we give it a little extra space, because this one's a little beefy, huh? Oh, God. Alright, my wrist hits the trackpad sometimes. And sends my cursor careening into the abyss and destroys a bunch of stuff. Okay, so now we have a really nicely formatted string here. It'll look really good when we console log it out. Save the string to a log.txt using the fsappend file method. If the file does not already exist, fsappend will create it. Okay, so we know we're going to need fs, right? Again, this is a built-in module this time, so we don't need to reference it with the file path. We can just use fs. And we already know, based off of the description I've given, that we're going to need to use this log for multiple things, not just the find show, right? So why don't we create another function on this TV called log file. It'll take in it'll take in one parameter. We'll call it content. Show, yeah. And then we're going to use this to actually log. No, this is actually going to be a little harder because we have callbacks. We'll get to that. We'll refactor to that. But for now, because we have one, let's start with the simpler approach. So we need fs append file. We're just going to do log.txt, right? Because it's going to be here in this directory. The relative path is this one. And then remember, this needs a callback, which is going to have an error. And I think that's it. So right here, if there's an error, we can just go ahead and return console.log error. I'm actually going to add this here too. A nice delimiter. Make it look real nice. Otherwise, we are going to be good. Oh, we need to console log the show description, right? Because we need to take that description and log it. One thing I forgot is we need to give the append file the text we actually want to write. In this case, it's that show description that we just created, right? Right here. Alright, so let's see if this works. I'll just go ahead and do node CLI. It's going to search for Andy Griffith. Nice, that looks pretty good, huh? And let's do an ls. It created a log.txt. It's cat our car. That's cat our log.txt. Looks pretty good, if you ask me. Alright, so let's do another one. Just for another test, show lost. That's a good one. Nice. Ooh, that's a long summary.
Yeah, it is.
So lost, ooh, average rating 8.5. Nice, that's pretty good. Good for them.
I use someone as well.
That's a good one.
That's enough.
Yep. Alright, so now if I go and look at my log text file, it should have two things in there. Nice. It's pretty good. Any questions on this code? Now this is kind of a lot, for sure. This is a lot, and this one is pretty tough. Any questions on anything I did in here? Now, I'll slack out my version, and I'll slack out the actual solution too. Oh, you'll get that? Okay. Thank you. Alright. We'll slack this out. Otherwise, we're moving on to the next phase, which is the find actor phase that we want to search for. So let me go ahead and open up the instructions there. So this is number 14, the final TV, where you're going to implement the find actor phase of this activity. Which is going to be very similar to what we just did. Anyway, you got like 25 minutes, so we'll probably go over it around 8:10-ish. What? That was the wrong one. My B. That was the CLI. Okay, that's my version. You'll notice the string interpolation with the backticks is much simpler for writing complex strings than it is to do all the joins and stuff. So it's a nice tip. Keep that one in your back pocket.
code only generates the show description if there's no error printed to the file.
If there's no error, well, there wouldn't be an error printed to the file. If there's an error, it'll skip all of that.
Right, how are you showing it in the actual terminal console logs?
There's a console log inside of that, the callback of that fs append file, that's console logging the show description again. So if you look on line 34,
Okay, so that's where you're actually printing the console log.
yes,
You're waiting for it to write to the file. It'll write to the file first, and then
I'm waiting for it to write to the file. If it doesn't, then there was an error,
right.
and it's going to show that instead. Now, again, the challenge for you, for those of you who do finish these early, is to make them nice. And by nice, I mean make them more user-friendly. Give better messages, right? If there's an error or something, be like, there was an error, and maybe have a log.error.txt or something that you can log errors to. Add those kinds of things to challenge yourself.
Also, right, that one was like no, they're not. You don't want you don't want small things there. It's not as satisfying. Start there, unfortunately, it's like find after. Yeah, so this got found after. This will come from the there's documentation. You show. Also, you don't call it what you need. You have to call it fix. Because CLI is making an object using TV. Yeah, it has so yeah, but like in CLI or whatever, it has TV.findActorTerm, and then term turns into whatever you type in there. So yeah, so then it puts the term inside of that active thing, and then it puts that in the you just copy and paste it. Like how do you get to it? And then like adding extra spaces and well, that's
So basically, that's why I wanted
well, so this is where the so you need a server patch. We're technically using our computers as local servers. So you would host your app on a server and then create a Linux page that you have to reference that server and all that app.
What did you change to C?
That's what I did See, this is the normal bracket, it's like an array, right? But then the other one is in curly brackets. So you got like 3 different. So like you show. See this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, mine wasn't working for a minute, but then I realized I had to change. Because this is just, oh wait. The JSON data, it parses the body, but then for this one, it just parses the body with 0 index. Yeah, it's not right. It's just like data.
No, I didn't, but I know I have a code that so you go you'll use dot replace, and then inside of the brackets for dot replace put slash, and then whatever you like. Another slash, and then you trying to remove the HTML tag from the summary. Here, I'll select that.
Yeah, you have to do, slash equal bracket, agency, equals, all that kind of stuff. You need to pull regex. That's already go right there. But actually, right next to the HTML text is very different. So if those HTML text have anything other than text between the open close and angle brackets, yeah, that's what you do. If they do, they don't, then it's just angle bracket, agency, angle bracket, potential for that. Yeah, then you gotta just do
So if you're looking for
he's on the right track.
URL. How did I get this in there?
Oh, you would probably, you need to do it like 4 times.
Really, I can put errors before it Oh, they're freaking I kind of just like commented that all out. So got rid of that. And then I had this console log. So like console log, oh wait. I put that 0 back.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
You do a global replace. So the G was the global, right?
Everything. Yeah, essentially you just have to pull it all out.
No, that is old regex. He's not this regex. That is like
Say console log.
offset, yeah.
See, I told you.
Or
My brain goes
I
way
should
back
probably want.
sometimes.
Yeah, that's the regex for that would be like
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that's until you save before you do the language system.
You're gonna have to run it like 4 times inside the slashes or like the tag, and then do a second one for the third one for the PA. Yeah.
something like this would probably remove most of everything on one pass. I don't know if that's sophisticated enough, and you might need to escape the angle brackets. But so you might have to do something like this. It's hard to say. But what this is saying is, what that's saying is, you have an opening angle bracket, right? And then you have this box that says either a forward slash.
Can you put the question mark? Oh, no, never mind. It's not first.
This says forward slash, lowercase a through z, or capital A through z. Then the closing box, right? And then you have closing angle bracket. Oh, this won't work. So you're close. You have to do a star, which means once or more, or 0 or more. So you'd want once or more. And then you have to do the closing angle bracket, and then tell it global. And that might get rid of everything. Maybe. Might not.
Also, if you go to like regxr.com, you can just put in some stuff in there and put in the regex. It'll show you, it'll like highlight exactly what it's finding.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool with it.
Regex
I
tester.
actually use that for because when you try to search off that, do this for that random.txt, one of the things that it takes quotes of the API. It punches this API breaks it with a slow.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can use a regex to definitely do that. But the point of using a regex versus just a simple string replace is you can do everything at once. So your regex should be sophisticated enough to get it all on one pass. Otherwise, you might as well just do like replace single quote, replace double quote, you know, and just do it every time for every character. There's not a good way. It's to read the docs and play with it until you understand it. It's so cryptic. Literally, yeah. There's a saying, and I'm gonna butcher it, but it goes something along the lines of, when you have a string where you need a regex, you now have two problems. One, you need to figure out how to write the regex, and two, then you have a regex. I'll slack it to you, Garrett. Alright, I'll give you about 10 more minutes on this one. And we'll go over it. Could not make it extra good. Wow, this is the craziest show searching command line tool I've ever used. Oh, nice. That's helpful.
undefined for one of them, but it took out the building thing. So
Got close, huh?
yeah, so it's manipulated.
Well, yeah, I guess replace the plus with a star and see if that gets rid of the opening tags. But it,
The opening tag is gone. It's just like now turn like the opening undefined. It's pretty awesome. It's one word. It's concatenated. It's undefined transformers, undefined insane.
whoops. Oh, did you put a replace string in there?
Yeah.
You put just the empty quotes? So it's injecting undefined into there.
Wow. So then it is working. How's it possible?
Because the function required something wasn't there, and things like that. Because you didn't put it, it's required to do it on.
This is a dumb question, but why isn't undefined null? Like null 0, right? So
Null's not 0.
null not 0. Null false.
Null is null. And undefined is undefined. So in programming languages that allow null, so like say C#, null is null, there's no undefined. JavaScript's particularly unique because it has null and undefined. And the reason behind it is pretty much historical, that the guy who wrote it and had this undefined for some reason, and then later they added null, but they're not the same thing, so there's double null effectively. So it's just kind of a pain in the ass. But no, null's not 0, it's the absence of a value altogether. Effectively, yeah.
Wouldn't undefined be any variable?
It's also something that doesn't exist. If you call a function that doesn't have return statement, you'll get undefined in the console because it's returning undefined implicitly. So it's just the absence of a value, which is the same as a null, but they're not the same because they're different values. I don't really know. It's just one of the things people really hate about JavaScript. Traditionally, actually, null did start as 0 because null was used as a type alias in C to represent a null pointer, which is 0 in memory. So yeah, actually it's how it started, but it's not what it means anymore. It's uninitialized memory is pretty much the best description of null. Yeah, you can think of them as functionally equivalent, even though they don't actually equate to the same thing in JavaScript. But that's just the implementation detail. In other languages, there's only one or there's none of them. So.
I did that so much time.
Thanks.
Alright, why don't we go over this one? The second phase now. Vista 5, how do we feel about this activity at this phase? It's a little tougher, yeah? Getting a bit more mixed reviews. yeah, this has been a hard exercise, but the good news is we've been going through it in like phases together, so it keeps you from feeling totally left out to dry, right? Hopefully, it should be. Anyway, so what do we need to do in this section? Well, we need to, again, call to this TV Maze API with our request module. We're going to have to get information about the actor this time, and then we're going to have to build a nice description of the actor and save it to the log file. So very similar to what we did in the last one, with some slight differences. And mainly the differences are in the type of data we're getting back and the shape of that data. But if you wanted to cheat and copy this just to start, you could. It's not really cheating, it's being resourceful. So it's a start. We have theoretically everything we need, right? Not quite, because this part right here, this data, isn't quite gonna work. And just in case, we should test that first. So I don't care about these comments. So let's console log JSON data, because we want to see what we're gonna get, right? This is the first step. Okay, so we know we want to call this API with requests. We know we're gonna get some information back. Why don't we take the first step and see what this information looks like so we know how to work with it? Now you could just call the API, or look at the API's docs and stuff too, but that's not so fun. Who wants to do that? Alright, so actor Tom Hanks. Oh, I forgot something. Don't forget your npm install. Alright, let's do that again. Okay, so I get this big chunk of data back. You'll notice that it's an array, right? And we can tell because it's got these brackets on each end, and then it's got two repeating data elements. So we see the score and then this person. So we just want to take the first element in this array based off the instructions, and then we have to get their name, the name of the country they're in, their birthday, and their gender, and their URL out. So how do we do that? So we know we need this. Let's get our actor out. Well, actually, the first thing is we know JSON data is an array. If why don't we take JSON data.length. What does not JSON data.length do? If it has no length, you can only check the length of array. That's close. The reason why this works is, remember that truthy falsiness? 0 evaluates to false. If the length of the array is 0, it's false. So if there's no length, we don't have anything. We're done, right? So we can just do return console.log no actor found. Boom. That's a nice check we can put there. Now, I'm not going to do all the same checks I did for the last one. You know how they work based off my example. But this is a check for this one that you'd want to do because it's an array of data. So let's do var actor equals JSON data, and then we want the first element in the array. Right? Now we have our actor. So let's make actor data. Let's use our string interpolation with our nice backticks. We'll do a name. And this one was actually actor.person, right? Because you had this object that had score and person. Dot name. Let's go back. So we have a URL. This one was actor.person.url. The gender was actor.person.gender. The next one was the birthday, right? Which was actor.person.birthday. Birth that. And this one was country, which was actually actor.person.country.name, because it came back as an object, right? If we look at country, it's an object here. Oop. And I was looking at it earlier, and I just so happened to know that the name is in there as a name. Look at me. Alright, let's put a divider in there, make it look nice. They have a divider variable we could use, but that's dumb when we could just do it ourselves. Cool, so we have some actor data. Now what do we need to do? We need to store it in our log file and get rid of this weird comment. Right? Put in our actor data, and then if there's not an error, we can just go ahead and console log the actor data. Right? Let's run it again with good old Tom Hanks. We get this nice information out. Right there. If we do a cat on our log.txt file, we have that information. Any questions on this? Now this works.
What would you do, like, say, because the API returns one after what the first one is the one that it returned?
Well, if you look at the data it returned the actor and then some other version of that actor. I would imagine if there's multiple actors named Tom Hanks, and that must be the case, there's another one that they just don't know anything about, then you're going to list, I would assume the most relevant one is the first one, and the best you can do, that's probably what that score means. So if we go ahead and console log out,
Like, for instance, I searched for Sam Neill, but, like, the first object that's returned is, like, Adam Neill. It's not even the same person. And, but the person I searched for is, like, way down in the object that's being returned.
so let's run it again. You'll see there's this score. Take the one with the biggest score, which is probably going to be the first one in the array. And that's the best they could do. The only way you can make this better is if, like, this one's Tim Hanks. Yeah, I don't know who that is. That's his brother. He didn't do so well. Anyway. Yeah, so you just kind of have to guess. There's really not a way to guarantee that one, because we don't really know exactly how the API is figuring things out.
Outside of, like,
Yep. Any other questions on how this works?
So one way to, since that's not valid, really clean coding sequence because your names are all the way over, you can just put a backslash n between each one of those guys in the same line and have a return thing, right?
What, for this,
For your actor data.
yes,
Yeah, I know. I'm just.
Yeah, so I could put a /n if I wanted to. So technically when you do the backticks and you do like a long paragraph, this is the best practice. Is to left line it all the way in the editor, because if I don't...
Yeah, I know, it looks bad.
Yeah, it's going to be all janky in the terminal. So if you don't want to deal with this, which I've had people say that, oh, I don't want to deal with that, just like you're saying now, my answer to them is if I'm the lead on the project, too bad, or figure out a better way to do it, but it better be easier than this. And if it's not, then I don't care about it, basically. So, yeah, it's not the prettiest looking for sure, but, you know, it gives me what I want. And it's fairly easy to do.
Otherwise, we have to put it all in one line with the /n, right?
Or put it in the array and do the join like they were doing. Like up here, they did it like this, which I think is a lot noisier, personally, and way more error prone. Who knows what you could do there. Plus, they're using NN there. They're putting 2 lines between them all. Well, that's just a convention. You could do that if you wanted. But anyway, I just think this is noisier and harder to kind of work with. But it's preference. Really, it doesn't matter. Alright, I will slack mine out, and then what I want to go through is debug this program, because unlike Inquirer, we should be able to debug this one. So we're going to walk through and debug it together. Here's my TV. Alright, so that's my second TV, which should have everything in it. Yep. I'm going to use the provided solution, though, for the debugging, because it'll be the one that we all have. We don't got to worry about any weird lot of these. So let me close this, and we are going to come on. We're going to CD 14 solved. Alright, let's blow this up a little bit. So we installed this inspect process. We're going to use that one. So it's CLI, I think it's inspect process. Let's check out the help because I forget how to use it. Doesn't have help, that's awesome. Well, let's look at the docs. Inspect process. NPM. Alright, what does it say to do? Ah, inspect, that's why. You tell it the file you want to inspect, and if you want to give it arguments, you give it a -- argument. Let's see if it has multiple arguments. Nope, we're gonna figure that one out, aren't we? Alright. Inspect CLI.js argument equals actor Tom Tome. Thanks. Let's see what this does. Oop, it closed. Yeah, it worked. Is there a break? Let's see. Figuring this out together. Nope, that didn't work. Alright, let's look at... So this is part of the fun of figuring out how to use a package. It's figuring out the idiosyncrasies associated with it. I don't know how to set a breakpoint like that. Okay, well let's go ahead and do this in VS Code then, since that's a little easier. Alright, so we'll open up code. In our CLI.js, we can set a breakpoint right there. And then from here, we can hit F5, and it'll open up this little guy. So now we're broken. I'm actually going to stop it really quick. And right here, in the debug panel, there's this configurations that says no configuration. You can add a configuration for node. What that does is it opens this launch.json file. And launch.json lets you specify what files you want to run, how you want to run them, and all that fun stuff. So we can tell it the program we want to run is going to be CLI.js, and then we can actually give it args, right? So I can do actor Tom Tome. I get in these things, like I can't type certain things properly the first time. Alright. So now if I hit my F5, I should be able to step through this. I should be able to look at my process. argv, we have there actor Tom Hanks. Perfect. So my arguments came in. Okay. So let's debug this together. Alright, so debugging is really important, and I want you guys to get used to it, so that's why I'm trying to like show it as much as I can. So I set the breakpoint right there at the beginning where it instantiates the new TV. So this is where we're actually going to see the constructor function. If I hit F11, it'll start taking me through what's going to happen. So right here, it's going to create the find show function. It's not going to execute it. Create the find actor function, and then we're done. Now we have a TV. I can actually hover over it, and you can see the TV has a find actor and a find show. that represent the functions. They even tell you what they take in. So it says function, actor, function, show, right? So that's pretty cool. So if I hit F11 again, it pulls process argv2, which is actor. Hit F11 again, it's going to join the next from index 3 on, which is Tom Hanks. Cool, so we're good. I have a show, I have a term. The term is not show, it's actor. So we're going to go ahead and it'll console log searching for an actor. And if I go to the debug console, you'll see searching for TV actor. Let's go into this function. Okay, it's going to create the URL for us. Here's our URL with Tom Hanks at the end, and nice. So here on request, because this has a callback, it's asynchronous, we can't just step into it. You'll go deep into the request library, which is not a lot of fun. Then it'll get all weird. So if you set a breakpoint inside of the request function like I did, and then just hit F5, when it's done, you'll be able to see everything that came back. Here's the body, here's the response, and all the stuff on the response. Status code 200, status message OK. Error is null, right? So we walk through that. Now we have this object that has a birthday, a gender, an image, a name, URL, right? So it extracted the actor from this index0.person, because remember it comes in as an array. They have a score and a person, so it has to pull that off. So now we have our actor. We can go ahead and step through this. We can see what the actor data looks like. Oh, that's what it looks like. And again, we're at another one of those functions with a callback. So we have to set a breakpoint on 54 and just step on through it. And we're into the append file function. There's no error, it's null. So we'll just go through there. If I were to, I always forget, Control-Shift-Y. Right here you can see everything console logged out properly. If I F5 on through, we're done. And my log.txt will have that last Tom Hanks. Cool. Debugging is a really powerful process, obviously, as you can probably tell, because you can see what's happening at your every phase of your application while it's happening, right? So you can take note of, oh, this is broken. I can already tell this is broken because I just stepped through it with the debugger, right? You don't have to guess. You know, hey, why is this exploding? What's exploding? You can literally step through every line of code and step to the point where it explodes. What would it look like if something exploded? Well, let's just set a breakpoint and find out. So if I run F5 again, it's going to run that same launch file. And we can verify that because argv is going to have actor Tom Hanks in it again. We'll just skip ahead. Now right here, if I hit F5, you'll notice it exploded. My debug console has the error. Error, I suck. And it tells you where it happened and all that fun stuff. But you'll notice it stopped execution, right? And as soon as it hits an error and something explodes, that's what it does. It stops.
So you see at what point one part broke.
Yeah, so you can be stepping through the code and then all of a sudden it'll just stop and you'll kind of narrow in on where it's exploding, right? You can get a little closer and a little closer. Any questions on this debugging stuff? Cool. Let's take a 15-minute break. Be back at 8:45. When I get the chance, yeah. I use Visual Studio itself a lot, which is got its pros and cons. It's way more powerful with debugging. Well, it's easier to use more of the power with debugging. I wouldn't necessarily say it's more powerful, because you can technically see the same stuff. It's just harder in VS Code to get to it.
that's not nearly as scary as just saying, hey, you need to do this. Okay, cool.
I was like, he's like the whitest guy you've ever seen. He's like 2% African or something, not South African. It's just like, how? I don't believe that.
My grandma's Virgin Islands, so I'm 6%. Like, oh, wow. Yeah.
My kid had pretty too. I haven't done one yet. I think I know like German, Italian, and French.
Really Egyptian.
Yeah, our family history is very young, probably really understood what it was, and you know, this, and like, probably like first grade, and we came back like 87% Scandinavian, and the rest Western. It's like all in the West.
Because I will check in stuff in today, but I have a feeling there's some bugs.
Yeah, well, what it comes down to is I can't tell that. We started so basically the green is
one package or
yeah.
do they have like
She just has to start. They just have it every day. But if you're morning, they have like for Spanish, they have vegetables, they have if she doesn't, I usually don't play the first day. Saturday I can't say for certain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been so very. And the thing is that when you're here, you probably know what it goes like. I've been on call for 2 weeks, dude. I just heard you.
I don't know if I'm gonna actually work or we're just go in there and quick call. We're the first really bad customer that I get. I was like, you know what? How about you shut that off and just listen first? That gets all
Just thought I was
Great.
They do.
Yeah.
So remember, Rolando, when you ask this Linux of an array, it's returning that object like it's a variable, so you can just call it to if it's stop and it's going to save it.
No, this time I asked.
In that case, yeah.
This time I saved it to a specific other variable.
Good.
I'm trying to check that variable against my switch case.
Okay.
It's returning as if it's returning the default.
Good.
No, not good. I needed to return.
Oh, sorry, I tuned you out. I'll be honest. I heard you assigned a variable and I said, good, that's good, he's on the right track. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions. In just like a moment or so, we'll get started.
Just like package stuff, you know, like freaking package handling, I guess. Yeah, we're
All right. Let's get back to it. So what we're going to do, Chris, if you could, I'll let you know, but if you could be ready for the checkpoint. When I start reviewing this the activity that they do, because they're going to cover callbacks, they're going to do activity. When I'm like reviewing that, if you could get the checkpoint ready, that'd be awesome. Okay, so we're going to discuss callbacks in depth, finally. Callbacks are something we have used in JavaScript since jQuery, I guess. We used them pretty extensively, and those were handlers, right? Remember click handlers, stuff like that. They had that function that you had to pass in to another function. And when a click happened, that function that you passed in would be called, right? And then your code would execute. That's a callback. We've also seen these. Will someone let Stephanie in? Chris, could you let Stephanie in? Whoops. Anyway, she doesn't need to learn about callbacks. So, the other place we've seen them, a few other places. One, the FS functions, right? Read file, write file, append file. They all have this function that they take in as their last parameter that has its own parameters, right? Error and data, or just error or whatever. And that's called when your read file, write file, append file operation is completed. Request takes a callback. When your request is completed and you get more data back, the callback is executed, right? So we're kind of familiar with them. So we have a function, right? Or let's just do FS. We have FS and we have append file. This is a text. And then in append file we have this function right here. It has one parameter in it. Error. That's our callback, right? This is the callback pattern. This is how Node handles asynchronous programming, because Node doesn't have multiple threads. So what happens is, in append file, if append file was synchronous and it didn't require this callback, what would be going on is it would take in your data. It'll do like a system call to see if the file exists or not. If it does, it's going to open the file. If it doesn't, it's going to create a file. Then it's going to take your data, it's going to put it in that file, and then it's going to be done. And you'll be able to continue on your merry way, right? So it'd be fs.append file. There's a sync version. Well, let's just say there's a file name, and there's some code. It looked like this, and you could have console.log, do stuff here. And then down here you could have console.log, do other stuff. Right? And in a synchronous version, in a synchronous world, our code executes one line after the other. So console log happens first, then append file happens, and then console log happens, right? That's how we've seen code so far in JavaScript, except when we've done these callbacks. But for the most part, that's how we intuitively think about it, correct? You have the top line is going to go first, and it's going to go all the way down. And that's true until you get to asynchronous code that has these callbacks. So with append file, with the actual version of append file, not this made-up synchronous one, if we have code like this, we're actually going to see console.log done. We've already verified this, so I know I'm just kind of preaching to the choir, but we'll see console log do stuff, and then console log do other stuff, and then sometime in the future, unknown to us, but eventually we'll see console log done. And at that point, we know that our file's been created, right? And we can verify that if I run this with Node. Do stuff, do other stuff, and then done. Intuitively speaking, that's not how we would imagine this should work, right? But we've got this callback. And what's happening is append file, instead of doing it all synchronously, is going out to the operating system, saying, here's a bunch of work I'm going to do. And it goes and it does it somewhere else. And it tells JavaScript you can continue. And JavaScript continues. And so that's why do other stuff happens. And then sometime in the future, JavaScript, the engine underneath, says, this thing's done. I know it's done. It told me it's done. I'm going to use this callback that you registered. I'm going to invoke it. And then it invokes it. And it takes over the execution. So what would this look like if we were to write it ourselves in a simple way? Let's just say we have a function. My function. And my function has one parameter called callback. Okay? Callback is effectively going to work as our callback. And this is what the function signature for like append file would look like. We can even make it look like, kind of like append file. My fake append file. So my fake append file is going to take in the file name and the data. It's going to do something. And it's going to call your callback. For all intents and purposes, we can simulate this asynchronous programming with that set interval or that set timeout code that we're used to. There's actually another one in Node called set immediate, which works as an asynchronous function, but it happens immediately. It doesn't wait for a timeout. Now we can call the callback. Writing my data to file name. So we're going to get this little message from my fake append file that's going to say writing my data to the file name or whatever. And then it's going to set immediate and call this callback. I'll leave the set immediate out for now. Let's just say it calls the callback. This is kind of what append file does. Except you'll notice one thing. So my callback is going to be a variable that equals a function. The console log, this is my callback. Okay? So now if I wanted to invoke my new append file, I could do my fake callback and call my callback like so. Do something. Oh, this needs a file name. Test.txt data. Do other thing. So what's going to happen here is my fake append file is going to take in our information, our file name, our fake data, and our callback. And after it does its work, it's going to invoke our callback. Now, from append file, what we just saw, we would imagine that do something's going to happen, then do other things going to happen, and then this is my callback will happen, right? That's not going to be the case right now because we're literally just invoking the callback directly from my append file. So we can see that my append file is calling this is my callback before we get to do other thing. This is synchronous code, still synchronous code. Even though I'm invoking another function inside of a function, it's still synchronous. Now, if I want to see what it would look like asynchronously and kind of start to mimic that append file functionality, now we have do something, writing our information, do the other thing, and then this is my callback. So this is kind of the order we would expect in an asynchronous flow, right? Now this is kind of what like the real append file is doing. Obviously it doesn't console log that it's writing your data, but when it goes to write the data, something happens. And it's no longer what's in charge. It waits. And then when it's done, it calls your callback. So how would this look without that variable? Right? So what order of operations should we get stuff in this case? We're going to see do something, then writing my data to file name, and then we're going to see do other thing again, and then this is my inline callback. And that's what we get. The set immediate is like our fake asynchronous call in this instance. Alright, well what if we want to simulate append file even more? So in this case, we have a callback signature very similar to append file, right? It takes in an error. Now what we're going to see is no error, because I'm explicitly setting error to null, right? Now what happens if I set this equal to, this is an error. I'll run it again. It prints out the error, right? So this is kind of a similar function signature to what we have with the append file, and this is my fake append file is kind of what's happening in the append file actual function. It's doing some work. It's saying, okay, I'm done JavaScript. I'm going to go do this in the operating system, and when I'm done, I'll let you know, and I'll take that function you passed in, and I'll execute it. And whatever you want will continue. Is that kind of making sense? How callbacks work right now. They're kind of confusing in a lot of ways, but the biggest one is, just like we can take our callback and assign it to a variable, right? We can use it as a parameter. Or just as we can have a function be a variable, we can also use a function as a parameter. Whether it's inline or we're using the myCallback, doesn't really matter. Point is, functions can be passed in to other functions. Fist of 5 on callbacks. How are we feeling about callbacks right now after that explanation? We're getting there. Yeah, callbacks are quite confusing. And the set immediate might not be helping right now. So if we just do callback error. Now again, this is going to be synchronous, but worrying about asynchronous and or not isn't that important. What's important to note is right now the way this code works is my callback is being passed in as a variable, right? It's one of the parameters of that function, and it's going to be executed. And I will be able to console log from there. So we can see here that this function, my callback, it's not being invoked directly, it's being indirectly invoked from the other function. Now this is a good target for debugging. Why don't we look at this one in the debugger? Okay. Alright, so, dang it, it skipped a bunch of stuff. Alright, so the first thing that happens that we can actually debug is my fake append file is going to be called. Notice that my callback wasn't called. If I look at the debugger, what is wrong with the screen? The screen has a bunch of weird stuff happening on it. Anyway, if I look at the debugger, nothing's been console logged yet, right? So we're on my fake append file. It's going to go into my fake append file. We'll see this console log. We're going to set an error, and then we're going to call the callback. And look where it goes. To there. And if I F5, this is there. Now let's look at it again with that set immediate block. So you can see I won't be able to immediately step into it. So it's going to do a bunch of system stuff, and then it'll eventually call the callback. Instead of set immediate, well, actually, here I can do add my console log here. So now with the set immediate, we'll walk in here. It's going to do its console logs. Okay, to the debug terminal. Nothing's been console logged yet. And eventually, if I hit F5 and continue, eventually it comes to my callback. And this is kind of like a penned file, right? This is a pretty complicated topic to get into, but it's important to understand because callbacks are used everywhere in JavaScript simply because we don't have multiple threads. And because of that, we need some way to be able to process other stuff somewhere else. And that somewhere else is a totally different place altogether from JavaScript. It pushes it out to the operating system and does a whole bunch of stuff with the engine. And while that's happening, we can continue our JavaScript. And then, like I said, when it's done, kind of like the set immediate does, it says, I'm going to call your callback now. It calls it, and that code happens. So that's why I can walk all the way through, and I can get to my console log hello, and then I can continue. F5 be like, just go, application, and eventually it calls my callback. When that point is, I don't know. Any questions on these callbacks and how they work? All right. Activity number 15, we are going to be writing a callback. So we're going to be writing a function that accepts a string and a function as arguments. It should be a log. It should log the string and then run the function, kind of like my first fake append file did. You don't need to set immediate, but just if I called callback directly. And then you're going to write a couple more functions like that. And you want to play with those functions and see how they work. And then see how write file works, right? So it's activity number 15. I'll pull it up here.
really functions, but you know, so it's done. Everything call me, everything forward.
Just not saving it. Yeah, just not saving it, but true, and then you have to put it.
Alright, let's go over this activity real quick together, and then we'll have a couple more things to do, and then we'll take off. Alright, so we had effectively 4 things we needed to do. Write a couple functions, and then investigate write file a little bit. So, write a function that accepts a string and a function as arguments. It should log the string and then run the function. So we can do function my string logger. Takes in a string and a function. It should console.log the string and then call the function. So how do we use it? My string logger hello world will then take in a function we did it Reddit. So if I set a breakpoint at line 6, we can see how this would work. So it's going to call my string logger. It's going to log the string. And then we're going to execute this function, and it's going to log the string. If I show you the debug terminal, we have hello world, and then we did it Reddit. Any questions on that example? So the next one is write a function that accepts a Boolean value and a function as arguments. It should run the function if and only if the Boolean argument is true. Function. My Boolean test. It's going to take in a Boolean and a function. Now these are not good parameter names, of course, but if Boolean, we're going to call function. So we're going to do my Boolean test, true. Console.log, woohoo. And then I want to do my Boolean test, false. Console.log, boo. So what we should see here, if I wrote that code correctly, is woohoo should log and boo should not. So let's step through this code. So this one is the one that should execute. This Boolean value, we'll note, is true. So it's going to go ahead and call woohoo. And then we execute it again, and it skips. Don't worry about that. If I go look at the debug console, we have woohoo. This next one was tricky. Write a function that accepts a function f and a value v and returns a function that returns the result of f on v. Running f on v. Okay. Function nest function is going to take in a function f and a value v. It's going to return a function that returns f of v. So what do we get? Var output function equals nest function we'll do return value times 2, and then we'll pass in 10 right here, and then we'll console.log output function. Alright, this one was tricky. There's a lot going on there. It's pretty dense, huh? So we can set breakpoints in all of the crazy places that things are happening. So here, we're going to return a function that takes in this function and our value 10. And now we're going to call it. So now we're calling the function here with the value 10. And in here we have our value 10 and timesing it by 2. And if I log through it, I should get 20 to the console. Any questions on these so far? These types of functions, passing functions into functions or returning functions from functions, are called higher order functions. And they're very, very powerful, and they're one of the things that make JavaScript powerful, is that they're so easy to use. I mean, sure, you got to understand how they work first, but once you get past that intuitive understanding of a function is just a variable that you can invoke, right? They're very easy to use, and you can see already that we can return functions that then use other functions to do stuff later. We're literally returning a function, output function, that's then going to call another function with some value some other time. As a matter of fact, if I wanted to, I could change this to y, and I could do something like this, and this should return, what, 120? So if I just do node index.js really quick, I get the 120. These are called closures right here, because they close in values into their own special scope, and they keep it forever, or until you are done with the function. So these are really, really powerful things to know how to do in JavaScript, because you can then create functions to do stuff later that you can pass all around, manipulate data however you want. In the original days of JavaScript, before we had fancy Node and all that, modules were actually written with special types of functions called immediately invoking functions, function expressions, which were functions that had functions in them that returned special data that you called immediately, and it gave you a module. They're crazy. But once you understand how they work, they're very ingenious, actually. So the last one was write file. Does write file use a callback? Yes, it does. Write file does. File test, this file test, and right here we have our callback, right? And now we should have a better understanding of what's happening at this point in time. Fist to 5 on these callbacks now. Did that exercise make it worse or better? Worse? Oh my word. This is dense. This is dense right here. Learning closures and understanding them intuitively is not easy. So Chris is going to Slack out a link. We have another one of those checkpoints, the little quizzes. When you're done, I'll give you 10 minutes. When you're done, hang around. We got to talk about homework. The homework for this week that we never talked about. Take the checkpoint really quick. Alright, you can spend a couple more minutes, but really quickly, we never talked about the homework for this week. It's optional, we found out. So, we're going to slack it out. Do it if you want. If you don't worry about it. The other thing is, one of us will be reviewing these questions if you'd like to go over them after class during office hours. If not, just go home. As soon as you're done, go home. And that's that. I'm going to shut off the stream.